originally from New Jersey, now taking over the world with his amazing comedy. Ladies and gentlemen, please make some noise for your master comedian, Michael Somerville.
Yay! One more time. That's Dre, everybody. Dre, come on now. Let him know. Working hard for you guys this week. Hello, everybody. Hello, 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 and welcome. Thank you for coming out. Have we all had our morning coffee? Are we all awake and ready to go? Yeah, did you eat? Everyone up at the... You think they're going to run out of food? Do you think they're going to... Let's do it. Let's get fatter. We can worry about it on Monday. Thank you. Who, by a round of applause, who actually came to my shows Wednesday night? Wednesday? Awesome. That's my core. I got a fan base. I love this. Well, we love doing Q&A stuff because a lot of times you guys have questions for me, or you have curiosities or things you want to know about, and there's not a lot of time. If you see me after the show, take a picture, get a CD or something, that's nice, but it's hard to really talk. So this is a great opportunity for you guys to ask me anything you want. But to start out, I'm going to tell you a little more about myself because there's some basic questions that you guys usually have. So let me start from the beginning about me and how it all began. I'm from New Jersey originally. My parents are born and raised in the Bronx, so I've been a Northeast kid my whole life. Grew up in the suburbs of Jersey, and a very typical, just suburban life. My dad worked for an engineering firm, and my mom raised 3 boys and went to school, and that was it, and never ever thought about being a comedian. You know, some people are born into like a crazy, situation, or they have some sort of broken home, and he had pain as a child, and now he needs to be on stage for attention. I don't have any of that. If I could do something else, if I was good at anything else, honestly, I would not be here. But I love to laugh. I came from a family who loved to laugh. We were just I'm probably the 4th funniest person in my house, no exaggeration. My mom is the funniest person on the planet. Every other word is a joke, and she doesn't even mean it. But I grew up loving comedy. My parents would put me to bed, and they would tell me this later in life. I didn't know, but they would put me to bed, and then I would sneak downstairs because they would put us all to bed, and then they'd go downstairs and watch Johnny Carson do the opening monologue. Carson was, big back in the day, and I used to sneak downstairs and watch from around the corner, watch Johnny Carson do his opening monologue. And I thought it was the craziest, wildest thing I'd ever seen. I couldn't believe there was just a man standing on stage telling jokes, and he might as well have been in Mars. I just didn't know what that was. I'd never heard of Hollywood. I couldn't imagine, but I just knew I loved that he was smiling and telling jokes, and people were laughing. And my mom would tell me my nickname as a child was Starshine, because apparently I was always up at night. Even as a little baby, I slept late. I was always up at night, and they could never figure it out. So this became a good career for me because I just set my alarm to get here today. Anyway, I went off to college, went to high school, went to college, went to the University of Notre Dame, which is a very good school, and I believe my parents are still paying it off as we speak. So much to their dismay. But that was the first time I ever even saw, thought of comedy. Even though I loved comedy, we had a professional comedian come to campus my freshman year, and they wanted a student to open for us, for the comedian. And all my buddies were like, "Hey, you're funny. You should go do." And I said, "I can't imagine." But they wanted someone to do 7 minutes, and so I put together a bunch of jokes about cafeteria food and what it's like to live in a dorm. And I went on stage, and it went pretty well. And I'll never forget it. Her name was Bertice Berry. It was a comedian out of Chicago, and she said after the show, she said, "Good luck. You've got something." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, my parents are not going to be happy about this." But throughout Notre Dame, my time there, I never considered doing comedy, but I became sort of the go-to guy. I started hosting pep rallies and anytime they needed a guy to jump on the microphone, I was sort of their guy. And then that was it. Graduated from school, got a job in advertising back in New York City, which I'll talk about tonight on my stage show. And quickly became disconcerted with getting up in the morning. I didn't like early mornings. I didn't like shaving every day. And I decided I didn't like sitting in an office. And along with that, I was in New York City where there's a million different things you can do for a living. I mean, growing up in the suburbs, I thought the only 3 jobs in the world were being a businessman, being a firefighter, or a police officer. That's all I knew. And all of a sudden, I'm in New York City where I see all these people doing different things in every different industry. And I said, oh my gosh. So I started checking out an open mic down the street from where I was working, and curiously walking into clubs occasionally and say, oh, maybe I'll try another joke, maybe I'll try. And then slowly but surely I started doing that at night while I was working during the day, and then finally at one point said, you know what, I'm young, I'm single, I have no children, no responsibilities. If I'm ever going to give it a try, why don't I do it now? So I quit my job And that was 19 years ago. And yeah, and here we are today. If anyone had told me how hard it was going to be and how much work was going to go in, I thought you just told a joke and drank a beer. I thought that's all it was. I would have run the other direction. But as I said, you're young, you have confidence, you say, I can do this. And it's a lot harder than it looks, but it's also an awful lot of fun. So that's my quick synopsis. Why don't we open up the floor to anyone who has questions or anyone wants to ask about anything, go right ahead. Are you going to run around with a mic? Or yeah, why don't you? We're going to make you actually toil. All right. Anyone have questions, go right ahead.
It's just come to you through life, or how does that happen?
The room service coming with 3 sets of utensils when I was eating alone was sadly a true story. That was 100% what happened, and I go, well, that's just funny, and I don't have to sit down and write anything. But it's a great question, is how do you write jokes? Do you sit down and write? Does it just come to you? And it's an interesting journey, because when you start doing comedy, you have the whole world to draw on. You've never done comedy before, so you have this whole well of stuff, your family, your life, your relationships. You can write about all this stuff that you've never talked about. The problem is you're not a good comedian. You don't know how to write a joke. You don't know how to craft it. You know that's a funny thing, but you don't know how. So when I first started, it was this strange thing where I said, oh my gosh, I have this wealth of material and I don't know how to say it. And then you pound out the hours and you sit down and you try to write. I don't have any one way necessarily that I write, but I would sit down and try to write and I would have nothing, and hours and hours. I think it was Steve Martin who said, I know it's 10% of the stuff that I write is even usable, but unfortunately you have to write that other 90% to get to that 10%. And then what happens is over time, you get better at writing jokes, and then you start to see the world through a comedic lens almost. Everything in your life just is kind of a secondary muscle. You're just like, you're laughing at stuff or, observing and commenting. That's sort of what we do. So everything that happens, you sort of laugh. The problem is then you run out of material. You've talked about your family. You've talked about your relationships. I get in a new relationship with a girl, and it's the first thing I always hear is, don't you talk about me on stage. I don't want to hear And everything she does, especially if she makes a mistake, she goes, if I hear that as a joke, I am going to. So it's a strange thing, and that's where a lot of comics start out talking about themselves, their lives, their personality, or their whatever, their families, and then slowly you start to go to politics, the world, because you've kind of gone through your whole life. At this point, to answer your question specifically, I don't have any one way. I try to write something every single day. Even if I don't sit down for an hour, I try to write even for 5 minutes or a funny Twitter update or something, just something creatively. Because I have this belief that there's something in all of us every single day that's worth it, that's creative, there's something in it. And if I go the day without trying to find that thing, I've wasted it and I'll never get it back. And that's probably the 8 years of Catholic school in me thinking, just guilt going, I've lost it. But that's how it happens. And still to this day, as much as I'll try to write, as much as I'll try to create, the best jokes I have, and probably the jokes that you guys like the most, are the ones that simply just came to me. It was the room service. It was your hands are so soft. What's your secret? I don't use them. Those are my favorite, and those jokes just hit me. But again, I believe you got to do the work. Like anything else, you got to do the work to get there. To make that great catch in the game, you got to do all that practicing all week long. So, I love, it's funny, I was an account executive at an ad agency, and so the way it generally works is we're the liaison between the client. We worked with Johnson & Johnson, AT&T, and Nutella, which is my favorite account because they used to send us cases of Nutella. But the strange thing about it is I was technically supposed to take the client side. So when we were in a meeting, we would have creatives and they would create ads, and then we had the client, and I was the middleman. I was supposed to say, okay, here's what I'd say, okay, client, what do you want? And then I'd go to the creatives and say, this is what they want, and then the creatives would come back and we'd pitch it. But if push came to shove, I was supposed to always be on the client side and be like, well, the client says this and they're the boss, but I always was on the creative side. I was like, these knuckleheads are missing it. They don't get, these guys in suits don't understand. This is a great ad and it's funny and it's silly and these guys don't get it. So I had to get pulled aside a few times and be told, like, you're on the client side. And I'm like, but I don't agree. I think the creative guy was really good. And that's when I started to wonder, what am I doing here? On top of that, we had Andy Richter, who was Conan O'Brien's sidekick. So he was the voice of our toothbrush in our toothbrush campaign. We did a campaign for Reach toothbrushes by Johnson & Johnson, and he was the voice of our toothbrush. And so I would work all month. I made $19,000 a year gross before taxes to get this job, and I would work all month overtime with no pay. And then Andy Richter would come into the booth, the voiceover booth, to be the voice of our toothbrush, and he'd read one sentence and make more money than I made the entire month. And I'm looking at him and going, I'm on the wrong side of this business. I can be a toothbrush. And so sure enough, that's when I started getting into the other sides of things. And I thought about becoming a creative and being the guy who writes the ads, and instead I said, you know what, I'm just gonna jump full into the pool and become a comedian for no money. Of course, thank you for the question. Where are we out there?
Every comedian's had a heckler.
A heckler, yes.
Do you remember your best heckler and how did you deal with it?
My best heckler. Well, it's an interesting question. Was they were the best or I handled it the best? That's two different things. Boy, oh boy, heckling is, it's an unfortunate part of the business. And what happens is, there's two different kinds of hecklers. There's three different kinds of hecklers, really. But some people just want to yell stuff. They think it's a sport, and they think it's part of a show, and that's what comedy is. Because in fairness, you see that on TV, or you see it, you think that's part of, we're supposed to yell, right? And he says something back. There's fun hecklers, and those are always fun people who are just being sporty, and you kind of put them down, and they go away. There's less exciting, less affable hecklers, we'll call them. Sometimes people drink a little too much. Sometimes they're a little aggressive. They can be a little bit problematic. But the worst kind of heckler, I would say, is they're people who are just sort of checked out. They're in the show, but they're so drunk or they're so preoccupied with their phones and they're talking that they'll talk and talk and talk and ignore you and then yell something and go back. And it's hard to handle somebody who's not paying attention, I guess, is the point. If someone's got your attention and you're talking to them and they're responding, is one thing. But when people are just chatting and being, that's the hardest thing to handle. But the best heckle I've ever gotten, it's actually, I'm going to do it tonight. It's a joke that I worked into my show. It was my first show ever, my first paid road gig ever, I guess I would say. It was a roadside bar on the side of a highway in Pennsylvania. It was about a 6-hour drive. I was getting paid $50, and it was worth it. I go, it's gonna be stage time, a real show. I was so excited. I was like, is my name gonna be in lights? How are we gonna do? I pull in, and it's a roadside bar. The entire parking lot is pickup trucks, and I go, this is not my audience. And I parked next to a pickup truck that had a bumper sticker which read, "Keep honking, I'm reloading." And I was like, this is definitely not my audience. And I go inside, and it's a full-on, just honky-tonk tavern bar. Everyone's drinking, screaming. There's no stage. My job is to literally stand on the bar and tell jokes. And they don't advertise it. They don't turn off the television. So there's just this madman standing on a bar trying to shout out jokes, and nobody's listening to me. And the heckle of the night just came from some redneck down the corner. I told a joke. It was silent, no one laughed, and this guy looks up with his Jack Daniels and just goes, "You're the ugliest stripper I ever seen." And I turned bright red, and that was the end. And there's no coming back from that one. He won. So to answer your question of best heckler, that was the best heckle ever, yeah. So do I write jokes for other comedians, and how do I get my gigs? Generally, I don't write for other comedians. That's a great business to get into, and what happens is you all start out as a comic, and you all think you're going to make it. You all think you're going to be Seinfeld or whoever, and then slowly but surely, things start to splinter off, and guys start ascending, and other guys start saying, hey, I may not make it as a performer, but there's a huge business in writing jokes for the late-night talk shows, for sitcoms, for when you see someone hosting, say, the Emmys or the Academy or any of those award shows, and there's a comic, there's 10 writers behind that guy. And then as you get bigger, even as a comedian, Chris Rock, all these guys have writers. And Chris Rock is a great example. He performs, when he's doing a new album, he'll show up in New York City, and every single night, it's impressive to watch, but he'll have like 6 writers, and he gets on stage, and he pounds it out for an hour, and his writers in the back, and they're writing and taking notes, and he's back the next night, and whatever bit he was working on is even better. And I was like, oh man, I wish I could hire 6 writers, because that looks amazing. But the answer is, I always wanted to be a host, a TV host or something. I said, I don't want anyone else using my material. I'll write my own material, and then I'll have people write for me. Well, that hasn't quite happened yet. However, when you're still cutting your teeth and finding your voice, you kind of have to write for yourself. And really, that's how you become your personality and who you are. So yeah, I don't write for anyone else, but as I tell you, the more I do the road, I'm on the road right now for 11 weeks. I won't be home, and I'm really warming up to the idea of writing for someone else right now. If I could be sleeping in my own bed, it sounds lovely. How do you get your gigs? That's a great question, and it's any one of 11 different ways. When you're really big, you know, Seinfeld or something, you have an agent and he books everything in a nice theater and you fly in a plane and you do it. When you're lower levels and you're not so known, you kind of have to scrape for it. So you have agents and managers who help you. In some cases, they'll get you. There are such things as cruise ship agents. There's college agents. There's club agents. But a lot of times it's who you know, networking, becoming friends with people, latching on to a larger comedian who might need an opener. A big part of the business is someone who doesn't have a car, especially when you live in New York City. A lot of people who live in New York don't have cars. So I got a lot of work that way when I was first starting because my parents were in Jersey and they had 2 cars. So I would just borrow their car and pretend, any comic who asked, hey, do you have a car? I was like, yeah, I have a car. And I'd go out to Jersey and I'd steal one of my parents' cars and I'd come back in and I'd drive them to gigs. And I got a lot of work that way. But yeah, and the biggest thing that I was told is having a car and being nice. It was just a strange thing. When I first started out, it was weird to hear that it's not so much about how funny you are, but don't be difficult. Don't be a pain. If you're a problem at a gig, if you complain about stuff, if you're not going to get rebooked. Doesn't matter how funny you are because no one wants to deal with your stuff. And as a side story on that, one of my first, I used to do some commercials, and one of the first commercials I booked, I was the Royal Caribbean guy. Don't tell them here. But I got this commercial, and I was so excited. We spent 8 days in the Caribbean shooting this commercial, and I was all excited. The first night, it was my first job, my first commercial. I was going to be on a TV that I couldn't believe. And we were sitting at dinner with the director that very first night, and I said, so what was it about me? What was it about my audition that was so special and so different? What was I? I was just better than everyone, was it? And he was just matter-of-factly goes, oh, no, you were like the 4th best actor. You weren't even that good. And I go, what are you talking about? And he goes, no, we knew we were going to the Caribbean for 8 days, and we didn't want someone who was going to be a pain. And you seemed like you were going to be a fun, affable guy. You were not going to be a jerk, and so you got the commercial. And I never forgot that. I was like, man, I was the 4th best guy in the audition, but he looks friendly. Everyone else was a pain. So, yeah, I still try to be that way. And thankful to have work. There's a lot of guys who would like to be here right now, so, and women. No, it's funny when you always think you hear that, the big break, and the truth is you find out, you hear that all of a sudden it's not such thing as the big break. It's a series of 30 or 40 little breaks, and I think I've found that to be very true. The big thing for me was having grown up, as I said, listening and watching to Letterman. I have 2 older brothers, and so Letterman was on TV for as long as I can remember. And then in 2012, I got booked. I've been on Letterman 4 times. And my first time on Letterman was 2012. And I'll never forget how it happened. I was on the road, similar to this, all over, on the road for like 2 months. I got home to New York City on a Friday night. And it was raining, and it was cold, and it was late, and I had a show in Queens, and I live in Manhattan, so that's 2 subways. I didn't want to do it, but I've never canceled a show in my life before. Canceled once because I was deathly ill with strep throat. Other than that, you don't cancel. You worked hard to get this. You go to your show. I showed up at the club, and it was this new club in Queens. It wasn't doing well. There was 6 people in the audience. It was 11:30 at night. I was exhausted. One of the people was the brand new booker for Letterman who had just moved into the building next door to the club, and she wandered over to see it. I did my show not knowing she was there. After the show, she came up and gave me a business card and said, would you like to be on Letterman? And yeah, and so even then, you're so jaded by the business and you get lied to so much, I didn't believe her. I was like, yeah, sure. And I took her card. And then she goes, send me a set this week. Send me the 5-minute set you'd like to do on the show. And I go, no problem. The week goes by. I don't send her the set. And she emails me and goes, we met, blah, blah, blah. I thought you were going to. And I was like, I didn't know you were serious. I thought it was just another crazy person at a club. And sure enough, so I got a set together. And August of 2012, August 22nd, but who's counting? I was on The Late Show with David Letterman, standing on the Ed Sullivan stage, and the moment I remember most vividly was when I first quit my job. I was going in and out of apartments in New York City. It's an expensive place to live. I'd get a sublet, then I'd move back home to my parents' house, and then I'd save a few bucks and get a sublet again. And so I wrote a joke in my childhood bed as an adult. I was writing jokes in bed going, what have I done with my life? This is crazy. I can't believe. Well, I told that joke that I was writing in my childhood bed on that stage, and I heard Letterman laugh behind me. And I just remember like leaving my body going, this is the greatest moment of my life. That was, if I do nothing else in this business, you know, this was it. And the show went great. That was my first set. Dave retired in 2015, but he had me back 3 more times before he retired. I was on about every 6 months. Everyone kept saying, he loves you, you're great. He never offered me a sitcom. He never did anything, Ray Romano, and none of that stuff. But I would say in terms of a break and getting exposure and suddenly getting legitimized, and that's the one thing it does. 20 years ago, if you were on Carson and you killed, you were Roseanne Barr, you were Tim Allen, you were Drew Carey, all of a sudden you were on the map and you had a sitcom the next morning. And that's almost no exaggeration. Doesn't work that way anymore. Money's different. The internet now is big. Sitcoms are fewer and far between. But I remember saying, okay, now I'm established, and I got a lot more respect from clubs. I got corporate bookings and stuff like that. And yeah, that was, I would say, Letterman was the big thing at this point for me. Do they pay the same, the TV shows? No. If you don't, I would do it for free. I'd pay them. I mean, it's they pay you. It's SAG rates. So the union, the Screen Actors Guild, is the union, and they have negotiated contracts for all TV shows, for all movies, and everything. And it's a regular set rate. And you just get paid the day rate. So it's, if I remember correctly, $1,000, maybe $1,100 or something to do that show. So you don't get rich by any means off of doing a lot of. I thought, oh, what is this, $1 million? What do I get? And like, no, $1,100. And I've probably done 3,000 free shows. So if you amortize that out, it's about 33 cents per show. But yeah, that's how they pay. It's all contracts and union. And then once you get bigger and you become a name, and then you see these movie stars doing contract. They're not working for the set rate. They're negotiating their own thing. But at my level, you're just happy to be there. Oh man, you gonna ask about my diet and exercise?
Not this time.
You've given up on me. If I was going to be an animal for a day, what would I be? Why? And what was the first thing I would do? I would be a rhinoceros because they're big, tough, and nobody messes with them because they'll run you over. And the first thing I would do would be take a nap. That's our trainer, everybody. Breland, make some noise for Breland up there. Go see him. We've got to work off our calories. My longest break being my most time off. The longest time not doing. I'm sorry, like not working. Well, I've been fortunate. It's funny, when you do comedy, in New York we have a bunch of clubs and there's always a show going on. So you're never not doing it. If you choose to not do it, it's by choice, rather. You can always get on stage even if you are not getting paid, so to do comedy is something you can do every single night. And because it's so hard to get work, especially when I started and nobody wanted to hire me, I've always had this mental block against actively taking a break or actually taking a vacation because you don't know when your next job is coming, and I don't have health insurance if I don't work, and I don't get income if I don't work, and so I've always had this mental block. Now the woman that I'm dating right now has been actively chipping away at that thinking because she wants to go on vacation, she wants to do, and the first thing I always do is, okay, well let's look and see if there's a club there and I can go on vacation with you and can perform, and she says, no, we're actually just gonna go on vacation. But to answer your question, the longest I think I've ever not been on stage was a month. It was a vacation. My cousin was getting married in Europe. I decided to make a whole trip of it. And a lot of comics will tell you they get the itch if they're not on stage for even a few days. One of my friends is Brad Garrett. He's from Everybody Loves Raymond. He's the big brother, Robert. And he and Ray Romano have been very, very good to me in my career. They've been very helpful. And they have a great club in Vegas at the MGM Grand if you ever go. But Brad and Ray Romano went down to New Orleans just a few months ago, and they took their wives on vacation for fun, just to let's go relax, we'll bring the women, and they both like poker, and there was a poker tournament going on, we'll play a little poker. Well, by day 2, Ray was telling Brad, let's find a room, let's look for a room. And he said, what are you talking about? Look, I want to get on stage, I want to get on stage. And that's a pure comedian. Ray Romano was 48 hours he hadn't performed, and he wanted to just get up and tell jokes. Brad Garrett, on the other hand, is more wired like me. If he would never get on stage again. He'd be happy if he could just go to bed and they would send him checks. But that's a normal thing for comedians to have that itch. I don't have that itch, and that said, at the end of that month, when I got back on stage, not only do I think it was fun to be back on stage. It's fun to be on stage. I don't mean to make it sound like I don't like it, but I actually felt fresher. I have some jokes that I feel are just, when you do too much stage time, you get a little bit just, worn down, and all of a sudden, taking 4 weeks off, I kind of had a freshness about me and a little more of a, I don't know, some jokes I thought were sharper because I had a new point of view on them. So that was the month off, and if the girlfriend has her way, I believe there'll be more time coming off soon. If she's going to pay for the trip, though.
So the other night I thought you were very impressive and very funny.
I agree. Thank you.
I actually think you're funnier than Seinfeld.
Well, thank you very much. I wish my bank account agreed, but that is a great question. And first, thank you for the compliment. I really appreciate that, and thank you for coming out to the shows. How do you string your jokes together? How do you memorize them? How do you? Yeah, that's. The answer is I actually, in my mind, have to tell a story. And I don't know if it's evident to you guys as an audience or not. I don't know if you can follow it. But I generally start out at kind of like the beginning. Like, here's who I am. I almost envision it as though you, the audience, I'm meeting you at a party. And to meet someone at a party, you start out with small talk. How's it going? What are you doing? What's it about? Did you eat today? I'm on a diet, trying to work out. And then slowly get more personal. And you'll see, especially tonight's show, that'll be exactly what I do. It'll be about how we're doing, who's flying tomorrow, nobody, where are we going, how's it all, and then slowly get into the the more heavy lifting of things. But for me, it goes from pleasantries to more personal, and then also a story arc, I would say. So when I talk about my girlfriend on stage tonight, it'll be from the beginning. We met, we had a first date, and all of a sudden it was getting serious, and so there'll be, because that's the only way I can remember it, from the beginning and then through the arc. Yeah, I'm not that smart. Yeah, Adam Sandler, Chevy Chase. Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I don't know if the question is, comedians talk about is, do you get less funny as you get older? Because that's a great point. Steve Martin, starting out, was the wild and crazy guy, and then he got into banjo, which, I put it on if I want to go to sleep. No comic understands that, but God bless him, he likes it. But yeah, it is an interesting thing. Chevy Chase is a good example of someone who, as he got older, just got, in some people's opinion, I'd love to have a career like that, but just, kind of lost a little bit of that thing that made him Fletch and, Caddyshack funny. Adam Sandler started, branching out and doing kind of the silly character, which I guess you could argue is just a more youthful thing that becomes a little bit, as you get older, it kind of looks weird. But I don't know the answer. If the question that you didn't necessarily ask, but I'm asking, and a lot of comics ask, is, do you get just less funny? Guys like George Carlin did it his entire life, and he got a little bit dark at the end, a lot of bit dark, but some guys stay funny. I got to see Mr. Warmth, Don Rickles in Vegas, and yeah, I saw him 6 months before he passed away in Vegas, and obviously he was slower, but boy, he was sharp as a tack, and he was still zinging people, and it was twice as funny because it was coming from this little old man. You're like, man, you want to get him a water and a pillow, and instead he's zinging you, and you're like, good Lord. But yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think I always use the analogy of music when it comes to comedy. Any comedian, you have to evolve too. Like my original jokes I wrote, I couldn't write now because I'm not the same person. And it's the same with music. If you have a certain musician you love, well, his third or fourth or fifth album or that group's album is probably not going to be the same sound because they're different and they're different people. And I think the same is true of comedy. You evolve. Maybe you want to get a little deeper. The other thing that happens, and I don't mean to bore you with an answer, but is you start to make money. And the truth is, A good example of that would be Damon Wayans, who was one of my favorite comics growing up, and he was killing it, and he would come to, he just do, and then he started making money, and he started having less to talk about because there was no real struggle. And then he got divorced and he had stuff to talk about again. But before that, I think once, when we're making no money and pounding it out, there's a hunger and there's a real kind of desperation about it. And then I think once you start getting that big money, unless you stay really motivated, you can start to get comfortable. And I can't wait to have that happen to me.
You could be like Steinfeld and have your wife write a cookbook.
Yeah, exactly. I'll marry a woman. Yes, exactly. No, I'll happily. Believe me, I think it was Ron White, the great comedian from the South, who said did a joke that his wife's family was very, very wealthy, and Ron's doing fine on his own, but his family apparently, or his wife's family, has a lot of money, and his joke was, "I can't wait for them to die because you will never see me again." Once we get that money. Are we going anywhere else?
The laughs you get.
Yeah, that's a great question, and exactly. Do you go in knowing? Do you have a set script, or do you? And the answer is all of the above is true. When you go into a certain situation for a show, if I'm doing a club in New York City versus a college in Iowa versus a cruise ship in Hawaii, those are three very different shows. And so the more experience you have doing those, you already know. You get a sense for, okay, I think I get a vibe for how this audience is going to be. I'm at the point where I can drive. I do colleges, not as much anymore, because there's younger guys who do that, who are better at it and know all the music groups and stuff. I feel like I'm 1,000 years old when I'm on a college campus now, but I can drive onto a college campus and tell you just in the first minute of driving, based on looking at the students, how the show is going to go. If I stop and ask one for directions and they're friendly or not, I'm like, all right, I can tell what kind of show this is going to be. This ship, interestingly enough, is probably one of the hardest gigs because this ship has a cross-section, as you've probably seen, of everything from 18 to 80, all different nationalities. And it's a difficult, or really 8 to 80 even, if you watched on Wednesday night. This little guy's not 18. But you have this cross-section of people from all over the world and all different demographics and all different backgrounds, and that is a challenging thing to do. And I first performed on this ship for the first time. I'd never been to Hawaii, never heard of it, and a couple years ago they said, "You want to go to Hawaii for 2 weeks?" And I said, well, that sounds amazing. And my first show here did not go well. I was out there going, "What's the deal with dating?" And everyone was like, "We've been married for 30 years. And I was like, okay, well that didn't work. And I went back to my cabin after that first night of shows, and I didn't leave. I never went out into Hawaii, much like us this week. We never actually went to Hawaii. We just sat in our cabins. But I sat there, and I wrote, and I wrote, and I wrote, and I go, oh my gosh, I'm in trouble. I can't handle that room. And some comics will say, okay, well then just don't go back to that room. My thing was, well, no, figure out how to do that room so now I can handle it. So I'll go in with an idea of what I want to say, and then the most fun is when you let go. You go, okay, that's the script, and then see what you guys bring to the table, and then we go from there. I do not. And it's funny because I wish I did. A lot of people always say, oh, you should go on Saturday Night Live. That's always, every Thanksgiving, that's, Grandma, you should go on Saturday Night Live. All right, Grandma, I'll call them on Monday. But the audition to be on Saturday Night Live is you have to do 3 impressions and 3 original characters. That's what you need to do. And I unfortunately don't do any voices or any original characters. So I don't actually, and I wish I did because I would love to be able to. But in terms of names, the nice thing, I've never worked with Rich Little, but I have worked with Ray Romano and Brad Garrett and Jerry Seinfeld and the neat thing, Chris Rock, all these guys, the neat thing about comedy is if you do it and you're in the business, they're not famous. They're not celebrities the way like a Brad Pitt would be. It would be a huge deal. They just come to the clubs and hang out and sit down and ask if they can get on. "Do you mind if I jump on?" You imagine saying no to Seinfeld? "No, I'm going on next. Sorry, buddy." And so that's the neat thing about comedy is you get to meet all these names that are just, these stars, but, to us, they're just comics. And I think one of the best examples of that is I was in Los Angeles and I was friends with the head writer for Leno, the late Tonight Show with Jay Leno back when he was on. And I got to go and watch Leno and hang out with him and have dinner with him after the show. And one of the I was so excited to meet Jay Leno, this kind of legendary guy. And the first thing he said, I sat down, I go, so nice to meet you. He goes, hey, you ever go to Charlie Goodnight's in North Carolina? It's just a little divey club, but that's all he wanted to talk about was stand-up, and is that club still there? And I sat there, I said, this guy's, he's a celebrity. No, he just wanted to talk about comedy and clubs, and you ever do that room in Boston, is that still there? And I realized that, yeah, that's the beauty of comedy. They're just everyday people who make things funny. Political humor. It's a good question. I am not good at it, thankfully, because it means I can get hired everywhere. When you first start writing jokes, you try to write everything. You just don't know what you're good at, you don't know what you're not, so you just write everything. You try everything that comes to mind, but quickly you find your lane. And I found that when I did jokes about relationships, both men and women laughed. And a lot of comedians, especially a male comic, will do a joke about relationships and it sort of puts the woman down or kind of rubs the women the wrong way, or vice versa for women. But for me, I was able to somehow kind of split the difference and be a little even-handed. In fact, the New York Times, one of the nicest lines about me was, after shows, women want to date him and guys want to buy him a beer. And I was like, well, and I read that and I said, you know what, that's my market right there. And so I don't do political humor, largely because it's not my muscle, it's not my strength. The guys who do it are very good at it. And as I say, I'm kind of thankful, because the truth is it makes me very employable. Especially in these days and age where you guys are getting plenty of it every single moment of every single day. And it's nice to go out and just laugh and not have to worry about hearing about that stuff.
You're not all the time.
Yeah. That's a really good question. I don't know if you were here earlier, but we had, it was more amongst girlfriends is when I'm told that I am not allowed to speak about that on stage. And my little secret answer is always, well, nothing's about you directly, it's a conglomeration. This is not about you, it's about, she's like, no, that's exactly what I said. That's exactly about me. But in general, I think my jokes, thankfully, are not so, cutting or there's nothing so horrible about them that I'm dredging up someone else's personal past necessarily. So thankfully, again, much like the political question, is I'm not really, but there's definitely a few of my bits, especially tonight, there's definitely somewhere in the world a person who would cringe a little, and if she had one of those dolls that they could put a pin in, I think I'd feel a tweak on stage. Wow, that's a great question. Many comedians, when they're not performing, don't have a sense of humor. The answer is some, yes. It's true. Some comedians are dark, dour people to hang out with socially. Other comedians can be very much on all the time. You get with them after you want to relax, and then still the show is still going on, and that's a little exhausting. But my favorite story about that is the first time I ever got booked in Atlantic City. I was doing a show down there at the Tropicana, and there's 3 comics on the show. Am I out? Oh, there we go. I'm back on. Yes, I'm gonna say that's apparently I've talked too much. That they subtly boom. So I was doing a show in Atlantic City, and my family, as I said, mostly from New York, New Jersey area, so they were so excited. Uncles and aunts and cousins, they were all coming down to see, like, I had made it. To me, to them, I had made it. I was going to be in a casino in Atlantic City, and they all came down on a Friday night show, and we had a great old time. The show went great, and then the other 2 comics and me were going to go gamble, and my family's like, this is going to be amazing. We're about to go with all 3 comics to a craps table and just play it. It's going to be the funniest night ever. It's going to be the most hysterical. They're all going to be killing it. Well, the one guy was the darkest, most dour, little depressing guy ever. And if you're familiar with the game of craps, you want to hit anything but the 7. 7's when you crap out and everyone loses his money. Well, this little dark, depressing comedian not only didn't say a word all night, but he played, there's a bet where you can bet that it's going to hit the 7. And so he played against everyone else at the table, and he kept winning. Not only he kept winning, all our money would go away, and this guy would just he and put a stack up. And so finally my uncle turns out and he turns to me and goes, you guys are not that fun off stage. But yeah, every comic's got their own unique personality. I like to think I'm affable and also fun to have a beer with. You gonna pimp me into doing the joke right now? Is this a good dance for me, monkey? Let's see it. Well, interestingly enough, for sale after this show will be my DVD, which has that joke on it, filmed right here in Hawaii. Well, the funny thing I'll tell you though about that joke is it's, you know, as I said, I quit my job 19 years ago to do this, and we write a lot, and a lot of what we write doesn't go well, and it's not funny, and you throw it out, and it's this torturous process, but you come up with these gems of jokes that you just love, and you're so proud of, and you guys are going to see, you've seen a lot of them already, and you're going to see the rest of them tonight at the show, and then on the ship, what I get was people coming up going, hey, the washy-washy joke, that was brilliant, you know? I was like, what about that well-crafted joke that took me 7 years to write about the parallels of Nah, you're right, the showers are small, and the toilet paper sucks. One more question, who's got it? Okay, you want to shout it out? Go ahead. That's the worst last question you could ever have. The question was, is the content on the 7:30 show going to be the same as the content on the 9:30 show? Yes, the two shows tonight will be exactly the same, except you're only invited to one of them. Does anyone else have anything else that they wanted to get in before we go? Oh, here we go.
The one show you had such great laughter. That was so fun to react to that. I think it was the earlier show.
Yes, I know exactly which one it was. It was the first show.
Have you invited them back to every show that particular group?
That's funny. Well, you know, it's funny. Comedy. The beauties of comedy is that it's unrepeatable. You know, it's just you catch a moment or a gem or something that happens, and it just you can't recreate it. And a big mistake you sometimes make in a show, or as a rookie especially, is trying to recreate a line or a moment. I've had lines that have killed in improv lines, and I'll try to bring it back in another show, and everyone just stares at you like, what? Because it wasn't organic and it wasn't in the moment. But yeah, a good fun audience like that is a gift. I mean, you hope for those shows, and it's weird. Sometimes you can do the same exact jokes. Even that night, the second show, people were a little tired, it was a little later, it was a little more, and it just wasn't as vibrant of a show. People weren't as participatory, and that's the business, and that's what keeps us on our toes and fresh. You never get lazy in this business, because you guys will eat us alive.